You can watch the video that I did on our background, but to introduce myself, my wife had cancer treatments for 3 years and then died when our twin kids were starting kindergarten. So I've been through years of stress and have been the sole parent for more than 10 years. First of all, I need to restate and remind you that research shows that the majority of kids and families do well after loss, and do so without special effort or intervention. I just want to summarize some of what the research has found to be helpful in families and give a little heads up about some things that you might want to be mindful of. But I don't want to worry you. As a friend of mine said, "Oh, it seems like pretty normal parenting things are all you need to do. In general, listening to your child, spending time with them, and supporting their independence." I'll do this video in 3 main parts, and you can skip whatever you want. In part 1, I'll give an overview of what parenting helps kids cope and recover. In part 2, I'll give a few specific examples of what researchers defined as warm parenting and consistent discipline. In part 3, I'll talk about things that can make recovery more difficult for children. Interestingly, the research and indications here in bereavement are very similar to what has shown effectiveness in families navigating divorce. Research indicates that there are a few things that help lower bereavement stress for kids. 1. A caregiver who is not overwhelmed. 2. Caregivers' warm parenting to the children. 3. Caregivers' openness to kids' communication about their feelings. And 4. Caregivers' consistent discipline. 5. Kids' ability to express their emotion and ask for support. 6. Kids' understanding of cause and what they control. 7. Kids' self-esteem. And 8. Kids' agency and skill building. This comes from a program of research called the Family Bereavement Program, or FBP. This research found that families who focused on these elements had fewer negative outcomes at 11-month follow-ups. These aren't magic cure-alls, but they show helpful effects. They also were effective for kids of divorced parents in results from a study called the New Beginnings Program. There were 4 areas of focus for parents and caregivers. For one, a resourced caregiver is someone who is not overwhelmed or completely breaking down. Some distress is expected in grief, but if the caregiver has engaged other family or community supports and is remaining somewhat functional after the initial distress, that helps the kids. Second, warm parenting in the surviving caregivers was important. Things like making time for a caregiver and child, showing love and appreciation to the children, and listening openly to the child's feelings instead of preventing them from speaking about certain topics. This open communication can feel scary sometimes, especially if kids are voicing deep fears or sadness. But having open communication helps children feel like they aren't alone with their concerns. Consistent discipline helps kids. It makes them feel safer and like there are guardrails on the path they are navigating. Random rules and consequences or threats are confusing, so caregivers were to focus on being consistent. And finally, if you add on life stresses like poverty, job loss, and home loss, it can overwhelm the caregiver and the child. So if the community can help with stability, that helps the adult and the child. Some of this sounds kind of basic, and that's good. However, they were strong drivers of improved outcomes for kids. And you don't have to be perfect. It doesn't mean that there will be problems if the caregiver has some off days. That's natural. And for example, I moved with my kids twice to new cities, but we managed it. These aren't absolutes, they're ballparks to keep in mind. On this next slide, we can look at what the Family Bereavement Program targeted for the kids. First, a focus on helping kids to express their emotions and concerns was important. Secondly, helping kids to accurately understand cause and effect, as well as what was not in their control or not their fault, was seen as important. Third and fourth, the program found that helping kids to think through distorted thoughts about threats or fears was an important help. It was also supportive to help kids to feel like they were building their own skills and independence, which is a natural way to build self-esteem. For more information on adapting using cognitive reappraisal, I have a video that touches on it in the coping thread and table of coping mechanisms. It's a simple exercise to show yourself where you are jumping to conclusions or overstating negatives in your own internal dialogue, and to reshape those thoughts with reasonable counterpoints. You can start it with a worksheet, and I personally have used it for years, including during the loss of my wife. Your kids might not use the worksheets, but I've shown it to my kids and used the framework in conversations with them. If you put it all together, this is what the Family Bereavement Program focused on for adult caregivers and children in order to reduce negative outcomes after loss. Personally, when I saw this, I wanted to look into exactly what the program was looking at, like how did they define warm parenting. I looked at a few of those things, so we'll share some of what I found in part 2. Okay, in this part 2 of the video, I looked into a few specifics on parenting. Remember the overall comment my friend made. These aren't earth-shattering parenting innovations. They can sound like some basics of parenting, but I've been there. When you're stressed out as a caregiver, or you're worried about upsetting kids by talking about loss, these are good touch points to remember. Positive parenting was surveyed in the research by asking kids to respond to statements like, your caregiver enjoys talking with you and hearing about your day, and tries to understand your problems. Your caregiver has regular fun time or playtime with you. Your caregiver hugs you often. How often does your caregiver compliment you? And your caregiver assures you that your family can get through tough times. Or, on the negative side, things that stress children after loss. Your caregivers acted like you were in the way and they didn't have time for you. Or, your caregiver said bad things about your deceased parent. Or, your caregiver talks with you about having serious money troubles. Another important part of parenting was consistent discipline. Kids were asked questions like, is it common that your caregiver forgets a rule for you soon after they made it? Or, after a punishment is decided, how often are you able to get out of it? To be honest, I haven't always understood how discipline related to kids handling stress, until a friend explained that it was like crossing a high bridge that has railings versus a rope crossing with no sides. Kids have fears about navigating the world, and having consistent rules helps them to feel like they have more control and understanding about what happens, and that there is less danger and random bad stuff. I'm going to conclude with some quick notes on some negative items that research shows can make children's processing more difficult. But remember, just as there were no magical cures, these aren't automatic tragedies if they come up once in a while. You will have bad days and won't always have perfect environments for your children. And unfortunately, in our society that doesn't have much of an organized safety net, you might have financial or job problems after your loss. That's not automatically going to ruin things. There's also research from orphanages that shows that children improve dramatically once more stability is restored in a caregiving relationship, even after they went through periods of having no caregiver after losing their parent. With that said, here are some of the negative items, just to give some concrete examples. It became clearer and more memorable to me when I looked at both sides. Inhibiting children's emotional expression. Children feeling like no one listens or understands. Caregivers ignoring the child and not meeting them in child-focused activities. Having a caregiver who has become overwhelmed and demoralized by the stress in their life. Children's exposure to further life stress, separation of family members, financial difficulties, homelessness. Oversharing stresses like caregivers' loneliness or financial worry without the assurance that the family will get through it. I don't want to spend a ton of time on negatives. I just wanted to give you a feel for what the researchers defined as items of concern. Remember, we all have bad days, and having some bad days and bad conversations won't ruin everything. Kids can recover. What I hope to do is to share what elements of parenting after loss are effective and what to try to minimize. I hope that it sounds to you like fairly normal, simple stuff to do. Spend time and listen to children. Help them to actually learn skills and feel some self-confidence and self-esteem. When a child loses a loved one, you can see how the world can seem pretty scary. It helps them to have a warm adult with them who helps them attach to a security relationship and who helps them understand cause, effect, and how they, as children, exert some agency and have some control. And helping them to cope for themselves has even more benefits. There is additional research that found that children who lost a loved one were then stronger and more able to cope with stress later in life when compared to people who had not lost a loved one. Remember, you didn't ask for this and wouldn't ask for it to happen if you could, but the prospects can be good for your family after loss, and some basic principles can help you along the way. I hope at least some of this is helpful, and maybe I'll see you in another video.